Welcome back, climbers. I'm your co-host, Kaylee Floyd, and this is another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC. In today's episode, Bobby and Adam are tackling the question, is MSP a four-letter word when it comes to CMMC? We're so excited for you guys to join us in today's episode, and we hope that you enjoy.
Our focus for us as Axiom is we're hoping to be level 2 ready by first quarter of next year, and then be ready to be assessed. We're anticipating the actual assessment to be available to be done by organizations in early 2025. Mm-hmm. So what's that gap? Why are we getting ready so early? Well, we want to be ready first so we can help our clients. Mm-hmm. So as our clients are going to be going down that progress, that road, we're going to need to be on that hill first. We're going to need to have the flag so that we can help them up and be their Sherpa, versus us just kind of discovering it together at the same time.
Yeah, and when you look at the SMB space too, there's a lot of businesses in the defense industrial base that are going through this process as well that don't necessarily know that they have those CMMC requirements.
Right.
And those SMBs look to MSPs. That's a lot of letters to say in rapid succession like that. But at the end of the day, they need the help. MSPs need to be able to provide that help and provide the right kind of help.
Right.
So that's kind of another reason why we're doing what we're doing.
So with that, let's get into history, Adam. Mm-hmm. So for me, this is an area where we want to try to be concise as possible, because I do have a link in this with Jacob Horn. He does a great job. It's about an hour and 10-minute video that Jacob did. He goes through in great detail about the history of CMMC. So with that already being well covered,
yeah, I would say if you're like Bobby and I and you find that kind of stuff fascinating, it's great. If that is not your language, it's the best sleep aid you'll ever find.
Right, yeah.
That being said, loved it, but we want to save a little bit of time, dive into that, kind of just get right to the point here.
But the big thing that we want to get out of this is the Department of Defense got very frustrated, especially in 2016, that organizations weren't first off, having a good beacon to follow when it came to protecting CUI, that stands for Controlled Unclassified Information. Mm-hmm. And so they wanted to provide organizations a standard, a guideline for them to protect that data. Mm-hmm. And so in 2016, they released the DFAR 252-242-7012. And basically a DFAR is the government's way of putting a whole bunch of legal things on their kind of website document, and then when they write contracts, they weaponize those requirements to make organizations that are going to be, taking those contracts on, they have to follow it, that they have to do what's in that contract. And in that DFAR requirement is where you start to hear now the mention of 800, 171, and 171A, that organizations are going to have to start following that. So at that point, the Department of Defense kind of gave each other high fives, and they're like, hey, look, we've got this thing crushed, everything's done. Organizations now have in their contracts that say they need to follow these processes to protect CUI, and everything's great. Well, that's not the case. Nobody did it. Those types of things weren't
Nobody
happening.
did it, but they said they did it.
Right, yeah. They were signing on the dotted lines, but they weren't doing it. So the DOT said, fine, we're going to take our toys and leave. And so in 2020, they released a new DFAR ruling where they weaponized the fact that CMMC is coming. That's when you start hearing the CMMC conversations start to happen. That's when you start seeing the DoD say basically, we'll see you in a few years once we have that requirement completed, which at the time of this recording has yet to come out. So the actual official ruling about how CMMC is going to be happening in those DFARs should be coming out any day now, possibly. But
we're recording mid-December right now in
Right.
2023. For all we know, once the time this is posted, the ruling will be out. We'll be doing another podcast on that episode.
For sure.
Or given the pace of the DoD stuff, this could be coming out, and we're still waiting. We don't know yet.
Yeah. But I think we're going to get a gift for Christmas. We'll see.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. But so what the Department of Defense did then at that point is they put everybody on notice that CMMC is coming and that organizations need to submit what's called a SPUR score. In other words, their evaluation of how they're being compliant with 800, 171, and 171A. So that is 110 requirements and 320 assessment objectives. It's a lot. It's a lot to do, a lot to require. So that's where we're at. So that's the history. That's kind of where we've gotten to this point. So let's talk more about next what an audit looks like, where where audits are sort of happening, how the ecosystem goes. But before we jump into that, can you actually go into 800 171A and how that's sort of being poured into those assessments and how they're kind of going through that?
Yeah, and I like to put a little bit of context to this too.
Yeah.
So as Bobby was already mentioning, is one of the big reasons for the why CMMC is a thing is all these SMBs and organizations said, yeah, I've done all the 800 171 requirements. I've got a perfect SPURS score, which is that's kind of the supplier risk score and whatnot. Everything's great and peachy, and we did our job. Well, incidents kept happening, leaks still happened. The government looked at that and said, hold on, you didn't actually do it, you just told us you did. Right. So one of the big pieces with CMMC is that third-party assessment, that audit process where someone else has to come in, look over your homework and say, you understood the assignment or what were you thinking? Right. Or even, so kind of where that all boils into. So looking at CMMC, you've got all the requirements, and CMMC is based off of NIST 800-171.
Right, which NIST is not the Department of Defense. Those are two different organizations.
Right, and if you go back into the video we talked about with Jacob Horn, it really gets through that timeline. Again, love that video. Compliance Nerds is probably one of my favorite things out there, if you're not the nerd.
Well done. Very well done.
But NIST came out with words and letters and numbers. We're already deep into the acronym, so this is fun. But basically, 800-171 is all about protecting confidentiality of controlled unclassified info. Now, they'll mention statements, protect the confidentiality of data at rest, encrypt data at rest. But what does that actually mean? Mm-hmm. So that's where, for assessors and people that have to figure out what's in place and how it's in place, that's where we get our assessment guide, which is backed up with NIST 800-171A.
Right.
Love to remember that easy. 800-171A, A as an assessor, there we go.
So now the Department of Defense said to themselves, look, we don't want to stand up another IRS. We don't want to build this huge organization that's going to start doing these assessments. They didn't want to do that. And I think that's a pretty good call. I agree with that. Now, they do have an arm called DIBCAT that does do assessments, but they didn't want to blow that organization up into a much larger entity to do all these required assessments. So what did they do? They spun up what's called the Cyber AB. It's a nonprofit organization. And they are in charge of finding for-profit private organizations to come to them and say, okay, we feel like we're ready to do assessments. We have certified people on staff that are prepared to do the assessments, that have experience in the DoD, and then they go through the DIBCAC assessment. They get assessed, those organizations, they get assessed, and then what ends up happening is once they get approved, they go on the Cyber AB marketplace, kind of almost like FedRAMP marketplace, and now they are available to provide assessments. Mm-hmm. Once the starter pistol, the rulings come out, and the Department of Defense says it's a go, you can start doing assessments, which we're thinking is going to be possibly early 2025. Mm-hmm. So that's where the Cyber AB comes in, and those organizations are called C3PAOs, not C3PO.
Yes, we're still following protocols here, but not in the same way.
Yeah, and one's a robot, and the other's an assessment organization. And that's not the first time you've heard that joke, I'm sure.
And the assessor organization is much less witty and sarcastic.
Yeah, of course. But the C3PAOs, basically their focus is to provide that assessment. So an organization that wants to get certified, which MSPs are going to have to be certified if they're providing support for organizations that are going to be level 2 as well. Mm-hmm. So if you have a client that's going to be level 2 certified for CMMC, you as an MSP are going to have to be level 2 certified as well. That is our belief. That's how it's going to go as the ruling is going to drop. Some leaked documents showed that was going to be the case, but everybody is in the assumption that's going to be. But so it's not 100% fact that that's the case.
Yeah, and to kind of focus on that too is I know there was the leaked documents, and we're kind of looking in on that, but there was some language in the documents that we already have that suggested that
very strongly. Yeah.
It was still that big. Well, what's it going to be one way or another? Because MSPs, to be clear, the terminology they used was cloud service providers.
Right.
And it's that big distinction of, is an MSP technically being classified as a cloud service provider or not? And the leak kind of helped clarify that a little bit more. But again, it's a leak. We can't really, put our weight behind it right now. But they put the writing on the wall.
I'd be 9 out of 10, 9.5, 9.8 out of 10 that they're going to require that. And it makes sense.
Yeah.
If we're providing support to an organization that's level 2, it makes sense that we're going to have to be level 2 ourselves. Because if you take CMMC and you kind of allocate the responsibility into 2 columns, our MSP responsibility and the company that is going to be assessed, the manufacturing company, whoever that client is, 60% roughly of those requirements either partially fall on the shoulders of us or fully fall on our shoulders. So if so much of the requirement for CMMC falls on the MSP, if they're stepping in and helping that client, it makes sense they're going to require us to be level 2 as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and the clarification that's on the way is going to be super beneficial because as we look at MSPs and what's currently out there, it's easy for us to go, we're not a CSP. We don't fit into this category. So the DoD and the C3PAOs out there, without clarifying this, run the risk of just getting into constant back and forth and arguments with MSPs trying to justify, are we a CSP? Are we not? Are we in scope? Are we out of scope? Let's just cut to the chase here and just get right into it and just say, yep, if you're an MSP, you are going to have to meet these requirements because of just what Bobby just mentioned here.
Yeah. So, and another thing to take into account for that is there's 3 levels of CMMC. There's level 1, right? Level 1 is if you don't have CUI, you have what's called FCI, which is FCI is CUI, or actually no. So FCI is kind of like cars, right? And CUI is a subset of FCI. It's a more stringent version of it. So it's kind of like, the larger and then coming down to the smaller. So that's why under the level 2 is where if you have CUI, you're going to be assessed. But if you have general FCI information, then you can self-attest for that. But just because you can self-assess and say, I'm doing all this, you still have to do it.
Yeah.
Right? You still have to comply just like everybody else is doing in level 2. You're just saying, pinky swear I'm doing that. So that's the difference between 1 and 2. Level 3 is still being developed right now. That's based on 800-172 and 172A, but is still being revised by NIST and some other things that are happening, and so all that hasn't quite been defined yet. So let's talk about, before you start as an MSP, what are some things you need to think about? We've talked about this before in previous podcasts about the kind of that, marriage counseling for CMMC. I think you did a good job of explaining, and I'll let you talk about that one. But why is, before you start, what are some things that you need to think about, that you probably shouldn't be doing? And that's one of those things that we've talked about. Can you kind of go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, so when we think through CMMC and what that entails, that's a lot of stuff, and it's not just technical processes, technical procedures. CMMC and any compliance framework for that matter will impact the entire organization.
Right.
So when we think about that as an MSP, we've got our client base out there, and we've got, Kathy's Air Force Widgets Company. She is making widgets for the Air Force, and they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. She may be one of 20, 30, 40, 50 clients. And now when we start looking at the responsibilities and requirements under CMMC, that's going to impact how we do business, how we operate.
Right.
And that can be a huge change depending on the MSP and what's already in place. Right. And is that something that all MSPs want to go for?
Yeah.
No is a perfectly acceptable answer, but if no is your answer, don't do business with Kathy's Air Force Widget Shop, because you're gonna run afoul of those requirements.
And you don't want to find that out as you're going through this counsel journey from an MSP, from some CMMC expert. So let's say that you bring in a company and they're going to do consulting for CMMC, and they're going to, you're the MSP and I'm the organization that needs to get level 2. Well, based on what we know, we're both going to have to get level 2, right? So if I'm the organization, the Kathy's Air Force Widget, whatever that was that you said.
Yeah, whatever we want to call it.
Let's say that's me and you're the MSP. When that company comes in to help us, we're both going to be assuming we're going to have to get level 2 at that point, right? And if you only have 1 out of 50 clients that do this work, that's kind of a tough sell, right? And you may realize as you start to go through it, halfway through this counseling session, 6 months into it, you're like, the amount of changes I'm going to have to do, I don't want to do that. And then you leave. And the same thing could be for me as the manufacturing company. I might start to go through this and go, you know what, I didn't realize this is what it's like. I don't want to do that. And now you're kind of screwed because you didn't finish how you were trying to do it. And then you might go, well, do I want to do this? So really, before you kind of step in and try to do that counseling session, which is a lot of what MSPs try to do, what you need to do is just have a heart-to-heart with yourself and with your client and decide on whether or not you really want to be all in or all out, because it's really difficult for you to walk together shoulder to shoulder with the client through that journey. You really need to be on the mountain, have gotten, the t-shirt, put the flag on the hill, and you help them up.
Yeah, because what you don't want to run habit, especially using the marriage counseling thing, is so you're working over at company ABC, you're going through the CMMC process as a subcontractor of a prime. You're making nuts and bolts. I'm over here at the MSP side of stuff, and we've got third-party person in the background here. They're coming in and they're saying, let's look at those incident response practices. You're going from the business side of stuff saying, my MSP does that.
Right.
Now, I'm over here at the MSP side of stuff, and I'm working through that, trying to go through it. But, MSP life is crazy. It's hectic. Maybe one of my largest clients had a full-scale disaster. Maybe all kinds of stuff can happen. And the assessor, and in this case our marriage counselor here, is going through that process and going, well, the MSP is not holding their weight right now. They're kind of dragging behind. They're taking too long on stuff. Right. And now the optics of that look bad.
Yeah, it does.
Because at the end of the day, the client's spending tons and tons of money on this. The MSP's spending tons of money on it, but the client's over there going, why am I trusting you to do this? I'm all in. I'm spending thousands of dollars on it. And you're busy dealing with someone that's not my business. Why am I paying you that?
Yeah.
It looks bad.
Contentious, very contentious. And as an MSP, right, we're just going to pretend you're the MSP and I'm the client still. There are tools that as you're going through that counseling session, you're going to realize you're going to have to change, right? And you're like, well, I don't know if I want to change that for just that one client. Do I want to make my people learn another tool that's going to be compliant for CMMC? And maybe, SIM solutions or SIEM, however you want to say that, is a perfect example. That data is considered to be protected and it has to be stored either in a FedRAMP equivalent or FedRAMP moderate environment or a level 2 equivalent location. So if you've got a location that has already been assessed and that environment's safe, that would be a potential place to store it. Those are all things you need to take into consideration, but when you start also thinking about the time frame of how long it's going to take for the assessment to happen, sometimes people don't realize when they start to get into it that it's going to take so long, 8 months to a year and a half, sometimes 2 years. We've been going at this for 2 years now, and we're almost there, but a big part of it is just making some wrong turns and not making the right choices as we're going forward, and it's proven to be a lot harder than we thought, as we went through that and started learning those lessons, then that's part of why we're doing this podcast. This is the reason why we're doing this. We want to help other people not have to go through those same challenges that we went through. And I think the cost, right?
Yeah.
What are some challenges that you see businesses and cost-wise that they're going to run into?
The immediate one is ignoring any of the tools out there. Because don't get me wrong, the tools, there's lots of great ones out there. It's not always the tools that can get you there. But the good tools that you need for this stuff, they're not cheap to begin with.
Right.
GCC licensing is expensive. GovCloud provisioning in AWS is expensive. Your SIEM, VulnScans, all the other ones, they're expensive. Right. But also, you've got to put the right people in place on this one. You can't just grab the intern off the street, fresh in the cybersecurity program and say, make me compliant. NIST language is complex. It's not the easiest to decipher, much less business operations, security operations, and MSP operations. People power is going to be expensive.
And the amount of change that's going to have your business is quite significant. For the OSC, that's what the organization seeking certification, and the MSP, they also are going to have to go through major changes and tool changes and other types of things. And those are all really difficult. But what you start to realize is as you're going through this, cost is just part of that equation that you're going to have to deal with. It's the knowledge about how to apply that's also a cost. You've got to acquire that knowledge either by bringing in a consultant or working with someone, and that isn't cheap as well, to be able to help you understand what you need to know to put this thing together. And to be quite honest, there isn't many people out there that understand how to do that for MSPs. There's more out there that know how to do it for just organizations that want to get level 2, because a lot of organizations have already been working in that space about dealing with compliance. Because again, 2016 is when 800.171 was really being assigned because of that DFAR. So a lot of organizations have been done it, but not a lot of MSPs.
So one of the things with MSPs and the 2016 requirement that we really have to think about too, at that time, this 2016 requirement to submit the SPURS score was still largely that self-assessment model. And MSPs looking over that model, we'd look at 171, but not realize that 171A exists, or we not realize that things like the NFO controls are out there, or some of the other requirements. For people listening, if you want to know more, we've done other podcasts about that where we dive much deeper in. But the thing is because it was a self-assessment and we weren't reading the requirements in full, we didn't know what we were doing, we were making mistakes. We would look at something and say, yeah, we encrypt our data at rest, but we forgot about that FIPS requirement.
Right, which is part of the assessment objectives.
Or we have instant response, but we never wrote it down anywhere.
Right.
Instant response is to call up Johnny on the beach and he'll dive in and save the world. But
those are things that you really have to kind of to take into consideration. What we have in this slide is really very clear that 800-171 with CMMC, when the ruling comes out, we're fairly confident it's going to require MSPs to be level 2 certified. So as an MSP, if you're not really aware of that, perhaps you were living on a rock and you were unaware, but know that is how it's probably going to go. So you need to be having a conversation with all of your clients and find out, hey, do you do work in the Department of Defense or take subcontracts from other organizations that do? Do you have a DFAR requirement that is going to require you to be level 2 certified or level 1? Because maybe you're not having to get assessed, but you could still be audited by DIDCAC because you're doing that assessment piece and the self-attestation that you have met level 1 requirements, which means you still have to hit 171 and 171A.
Yeah.
So those are really big deals.
And a great example on the why on that too. So MSPs, we provide plenty of good services for our clients. We already talked about the overlap there. So thinking through this process, you've just hired a new employee. Great example. Hi, I'm an employee. I was hired recently. So I'm now brought on board, and I'm now going to have to support those environments that are have the CUI in it. How do you know that I'm not some weird convicted felon somewhere for selling secrets to the Russians?
You're not, are you?
I hope not. So you've got to go through those appropriate personnel screening procedures and authorize me and make sure that I'm authorized to touch this data. Right. Another great example of that.
Which we did background check you, by the way.
We did. But a great example of that is if that data happened to be sensitive to U.S. secrets and was under ITAR restrictions for being export controlled. If I wasn't a U.S. citizen and then I was in the U.S. as a foreign national, it'd still be great to work together, but I couldn't see that data. I couldn't touch that data. I couldn't support that environment. Right. So that's where you can start to see that overlap and why MSPs have to fall into this, especially when you look out on the MSP communities and they're we're at a race to cut costs. We're feeling the financial burden as any other industry, and we're feeling the skills gap as any other industry. And you see things out there in the community saying, has anyone used outsourced services that outsource tech support to the Philippines or India or wherever? And it's like you can make that decision as a business for an MSP. But if those individuals have access to CUI environments, we've got a problem here.
Right. Those are tough things in your organization. You really have to think about some things that you really should be doing. One of the first things, we'll go quickly because we're running low on time here, is you want to have a good system security plan. If you're not sure what a system security plan is and you're trying to go for CMMC, you're in trouble. So you really need to start diving into getting better understanding of knowledge. But a system security plan in a high level is really just a story. It's a document that your auditor is going to be looking for. It's the first thing they want to see. It's that storybook. It's the kind of the abridged version of your story of how you're doing your compliance and your approach to CMMC assessment. They're going to look at that and they're going to see how it connects to everything else, all your policies and all your procedures. So it is really the heart and soul of your security posture. They want to see that. So before you're tackling that, you really should understand that. You should probably have one already in existence with how you operate your system so that you can start evolving that into something else.
Yeah, and keep in mind the NIST SSP template has options for you to say that it's not implemented yet. It's planned to be implemented. Yeah. So you can still go through and use that to start the assessment process and say
to yourself, but you couldn't go through assessment if you don't have an SSP.
Correct. Yeah.
Just to be clear.
Yeah. Every resource I've ever seen anywhere ever is basically when you get to the option of SSP and you say no, it basically goes nope, game over. You're out of lives. You've died. Go past go, but do not collect $200.
So something that's passionate to you is risk assessment. Can you talk a little bit about how important that is for organizations?
Yeah, so inherently all businesses will face risk at all times. It can be coming from inside the house with insider threats, externally from competition, the risks of non-compliance, risk of threat actors, foreign, domestic, blah, 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 blah. There are risks everywhere. There's a risk that when I stand up off this chair right now, I will fall over and crack my skull. The likelihood of that is very low, but it's important for MSPs and our client base to go through these risk assessments to understand when we do stuff where vulnerabilities may come into play, and what are we going to do about them. In some instances, it may be a simple matter of dealing with this issue is going to be far too cost prohibitive for us to take action on it. We're willing to accept this low-level risk. And
with MSPs, we're targeted. Right? They're coming, threat actors are coming after us, and they're coming after our tools. A perfect example of that is what happened with Kaseya. that tool was specifically targeted. Okay, so part of that risk assessment process is to look at the tools, and you have to do it at least once a year, and through any changes, you want to assess those as well. That's part of the CMMC process. But let's be honest, MSPs haven't been doing a very good job of doing that internally. And for those organizations that do go for CMMC, they're going to be forced to do that, and I think that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
It's been very helpful for us looking at that. Learning how to provide risk assessments for ourselves, it has made us so much better of a company.
Yeah, and to be clear on that, how MSPs handle risk assessments, I've legitimately seen MSPs, their risk assessment process is to call up the vendor. Hey, Mr. Vendor, I'm doing a risk assessment. Do you treat security very well? You do? Cool, we're good. We're done.
Yeah.
We've done our risk assessment.
It's very tertiary.
And if that's the case, if that's your risk assessment process, yikes. And if that's the case, I've got a bridge to sell you in New York. I'd also like to announce that I'm now the new Queen of England. And if we're taking that word, then have some fun.
So quickly going through the rest of the things we have on here, change control, that's really important inside your organization. That should be part of your culture before you even start trying to tackle CMMC. If you haven't, it's going to be very difficult for you to really push into the CMMC space, because if you're trying to learn how to do change control and you've never done it, at the same time you're trying to dial in your processes and policies, it's going to be very, very difficult. So getting used to change control process. Make sure, review your tools. That's part of the risk piece. Making sure that your tools don't compromise your journey. And if you realize that they are, how are you going to address that? You need to understand that before you start, because you have to have a design that you're shooting for in order for you to have a chance of success. And the last piece is ticket templates. If your organization does not have a good process of templates in your tickets, and the reason why this is important is when your client sends you a request, you have to be able to follow the process that they're expecting you to follow, and a big way to do that is ticket templates. So when you have your ticket template that says, hey, I'm onboarding a new employee, here's the 20 things that I'm going to do, and I'm checking them off in the ticket, and that becomes my evidence of what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, we as MSPs, and coming from my background in help desk and everything, we deal with a lot of end users and a lot of clients. If you ask me what the difference is between company ABC and company XYZ from the MSPs I've dealt with over the years, I can't say that everyone can remember all those specific nuances.
But if it's a ticket template, the engineer doesn't have to be a master of understanding everything related to that client.
They don't have to look it up. They don't have to think, did I look it up?
It's in the template.
Yep, it's right there.
They're following it and they go through. And that provides a lot of consistency and, more importantly, evidence.
Yep.
It provides evidence.
Yep.
So the next thing that we want to talk about is, if you're going for it, where should you start? And I think the first thing is just trying to get knowledge, understanding it. We have some suggestions up here. Amira has a great template. We highly suggest her. Brian Hubbard he's done, I think at this point, maybe 5 joint assessments with DibCAC and has a wealth of knowledge. He has a community he's starting. Highly suggest you talk with him. Sum it up with Jacob Horm and Jason Sprouser. Park, Place, and Boardwalk of podcasts, as far as it's the best if you want to really get some good information about CMMC. They're really, really good. I really enjoy those. And then, possibly go for your CCP. Try to get, educated. Edwards Performance Solutions has a great training course on that. And I went through that myself, and I can't speak enough about them. And then us, follow the podcast. And there's others. Jacob Hill has a great podcast about compliance. Others have more on there, and if
and there's a growing list of people in the MSP community that are going through this journey. It's still a small select group, but we're getting more of us, and we're here to share. And everyone has their different takes on it, but there's lots of great people out there. We were talking to some, over the last couple of days. We were sitting in some of those webinars and everything over lunch today. And they've got some interesting perspectives to share. And especially given the fluidity of the rulemaking process, we'll see how things ultimately shape up in the end. But as we find out more and more as we're going through them, we're hearing the same items repeated time and time again.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the different people kind of reinventing the same wheel. Everybody's kind of coming to a lot of the same conclusions as we're all coming at this from different directions, and more organizations are creating podcasts. You're starting to see a lot of the same voices saying kind of sort of the same things as you're starting to get, I think, more consistency, and that's going to continue, especially once the ruling comes out. A lot more of that's going to start happening.
Yeah, so many great resources though at this point. Everyone on this list is fantastic, but if you're looking for others and want other thoughts, just go on LinkedIn and search the hashtag CMMC, and you'll start finding someone, seeing who's interacting. You'll probably start finding the same posts from the same people with the same other people in the comments talking about it, and
Yeah, the what is it? The CUI of Excellence, the Discord channel. It's also a really good one.
Yeah.
You can get an invite from some people, and I'd be happy to share an invite to that channel as well. That Discord is really, really great. So many just amazing people that know a lot more about CMMC than we do, and that Discord is made up of many organizations that aren't MSPs, so it's a very large one. So that's a great one to follow as well. So, kind of drill down on, MSPs is a 4-letter word. Why does this presentation have that title? And a lot of that has to deal with the fact that MSPs, we're so used to just buying tools and doing types of things like that. We can provide services for a lot of different clients in a lot of different industries, and a lot of MSPs have kind of come to the conclusion that CMMC is going to be that way. That would be an incorrect conclusion. It's not. It's going to be completely different than anything you've ever done. You have to either go all in, or you have to figure out how you're going to back out, because you can't ride 2 horses with one butt. You're either on this one, which is I'm all in, or you are riding off to the sunset out.
Yeah, it's not quite the game we played with HIPAA back in the day.
Right, no, definitely not. Yeah. So you've got to really make that choice. And I think that's going to create, and there's a lot of vendors that are also trying to sell MSPs to kind of help double down on that belief so they can kind of cash in as well. And what's going to end up happening is MSPs are helping people in ignorance, and both of you are, kind of going through this blind process. And when they start to approach the C3PAO to get assessed, they're going to find out you're not ready, and all the money they've spent, that client's not going to be happy, and there's going to be a lot of fallout from that. And the other piece that you're going to see is that a lot of these assessors, are coming from FedRAMP and other things. And can
enterprise.
you talk about that?
Yeah, MSPs as a whole, when it comes to the space, we're the redheaded stepchild that no one wants to think about.
Right.
And the people that are in this are used to working with big departments, big government.
Millions of dollar budgets.
Yeah, when we look at tools that, the cost of GCC licensing, for example, and you mentioned that to Lockheed Martin, they're going to look at you and go, why are we talking about this? This is a rounding error on our monthly financial statement. Get out of here. You're wasting my time.
Right.
Where you take the same number down to, Kathy's naval widget factory in Emporium or whatever we were talking about earlier, and you drop the same amount, and she's going, you think you just stole her puppy.
Right, yeah.
We've got to factor that in, and I think that gets well into the next point on here too. If we get it wrong, we are the scapegoat. We're the ones that have to deal with. And MSPs as a whole, we've not had the best reputation when it comes to dealing with security and compliance because of the challenges that come with the MSP space, the complexities around it. We don't, as an industry, we don't need another thing that the industry as a whole looks at and says, yeah, there's another thing the MSP screwed up again.
Right. And those assessors that are coming from FedRAMP audits, coming from much larger audits, they don't really understand the S&B space. They're seeing those headlines, they're hearing those things about MSPs, they're going to come in with some assumptions, and then as they start doing assumptions, if a lot of MSPs are still in the space with ignorance, people are going to start failing, and it's going to start creating more and more of this stigma about us in the industry, and it's going to be bad for everybody. And so we just kind of want to make this session to kind of like help everybody wake up to this reality and start understanding, have a discussion with your clients, find out if you're going to be susceptible to that, find out if you want to participate. If you're curious about possibly participating, let us know. We want to try to help you out. We want to know whether you want to do that. But the last thing that we want to talk about is whether or not, why would you want to get into this space, right? Why do you want to participate? Why would you want to do that? And I think the first thing is we're estimating between 25 and 50 in the next few years, or the only about that many MSPs are going to be level 2 certified. Not many. So if you think about the tens and tens of thousands of SMB organizations that participate in a DIB, they're going to need MSPs to help them get there. And if you only have between 25 and 50 that can do it, that's a lot of business.
A lot of business for a few people.
For a few people. And what you're going to find out is probably the limiting factor isn't going to be how many assessors. The limiting factor isn't going to be how many C3PAOs. The limiting factor is probably going to be us. There isn't going to be enough MSPs to support the the SMB space to help them get ready for CMMC, and it's going to be a real problem. And so I think you're going to start seeing a lot of MSPs start scrambling to try to get there late because they start seeing that there's such a greenfield and a need for that, and so many people are begging for them to come over. I think it's just going to be just almost a rush, like a Christmas Black Friday rush to try to provide those services. And so if you can start at least now and start getting your organization moved over and get ready, it's a massive commitment. It's very expensive. But when you're there, I think it will be well worth the return. Plus, the multiples for your business is going to be worth considerably more. I think one of the sessions in Rejection Con they were talking about is how organizations that are just involved in the financial compliance, most of those organizations are now worth multiples just because of how they're involved in that. And this is going to be no different and probably exponentially larger. So, your organization will be worth more as an MSP. You'll be worth more in your multiples. And I think you'll be a safer and stronger organization. So those are the reasons why for us.
And actually, I liked a really interesting point that we were talking about last night, is it's also, to an extent, job security.
Yeah.
Because CMMC, as it sits right now, is focused on the defense industrial base in the United States, right? What are our largest industries in the U.S.? We've got pharmaceutical, but it's military as well.
Yeah.
And that military spending comes down to the defense industrial base and these SMBs. The Pentagon's not magically going to close up shop one day. Right. If it does, we as a country have also closed up shop.
Yeah.
So unless something drastic happens and the government decides to completely upend the economy and consolidate, nationalize, whatever they want to do, we're going to have that SMB community. Those SMBs are going to need technology, security, and compliance and support. And as MSPs, if we're positioned to handle that, right now, if it's that 50 out there and we're the only 50 to handle the millions of SMBs out there, that's great. We're going to be taking it to the bank, cashing those checks, and giggling in our Ferraris on the way home.
Well, but another aspect of it too, I think, that's really important is that as an MSP, you're going to be a tighter integration with your client, not like anything you've ever had before, because you have to be ready to support them, and they have to be ready to pass the information. It's not like any normal engagement you've had. So it's not
transactional at all.
Yeah, it is. It's very much almost a marriage between the two of you, and you're continually moving forward. And so when you have that relationship with that client, it's not like they can just kind of say, well, I think I don't want to do business with you anymore. I'm just going to switch to somebody else. That integration is pretty tight because that's the only way it really can operate. So you have a tremendous more amount of stickiness with your clients when you have those types of engagements with them. So, you have higher multiples, you have higher stickiness with your clients. There's going to be a higher rate of return and more value for your business, and it's more of a greenfield. So those are pretty significant reasons why you would want to step into that space. And that's another reason why I wanted to mention that. It's not all about, the money or the return. It's something that we have a passion about. And last thing, but not least, I think the most important is I think you're being involved in this space, you're doing a service for the country. You're helping protect the war fighters by helping protect the industries and organizations and keeping that data safe and making our technologies that are so critical safe, because organizations need us to be involved in that space. And so I think it's almost a higher calling. We were talking about that earlier about some organizations just aren't going to see it, but we felt almost called to be in that space. Like we really need to do that, and we just had a passion for it, and that's why we got involved. These other things are very important to us, but to be honest with you, that's the most important one for me. Like I just have such a passion for that industry and trying to help out that community, and I know it's going to make me better. And oh, by the way, these other things are going to come along for the ride, which are 2 thumbs up for me. It's just a win-win, and that's the reason why we got involved in the the ecosystem for us.
Yeah, my journey is when I went through that first initial taste of compliance, I said, this sounds great. I like this. This works well with how my brain works and the weirdness of all that. So yay for me. But at the same time, if it can make some good money that lets me go out and have fun experiences, do great things, while also helping those small, medium businesses that directly impact my friends, family, neighbor, why not, right? Like it's the perfect combo.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this session that we went through. We went a little bit long, and I apologize about that, but we had a lot to cover. If you have any questions, please head us up on LinkedIn, or DM us directly through LinkedIn, or message us. And then if you have ideas or suggestions you'd like to see us cover in our podcasts in the future, please let us know. We really would like to know that. We're always looking for good topics because we have a lot of passion. We want to be very transparent through the process for us. Until next time, everybody, I'm Bobby, and
this is Adam.
And keep on climbing, everybody, on Mount CMMC, and see you next time.
Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.